following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and our focus continues to be on the escalating conflict between Israel and Hamas. Is there now a divergence of views between Israel and its closest ally, the United States, on the way the Israel-Hamas war is proceeding and the possible final outcome? The United States has cautioned Israel against reoccupying Gaza after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu suggested in an interview that Tel Aviv could consider having the overall security responsibility in Gaza for an indefinite period once the war against Hamas is over. Today, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on Israel not to reoccupy Gaza after the war. Speaking to reporters after the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Japan, Blinken listed what he said were key elements in order to create durable peace and security. He said, and I quote, "The United States believes key elements should include no forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, not now, not after the war. No use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism or other violent attacks. No reoccupation of Gaza after the conflict ends." Blinken added that other conditions included no attempt to blockade or besiege Gaza or any reduction in the territory of Gaza. Earlier, in response to Netanyahu's statement about the post-war scenario in Gaza, White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said the U.S. president still believes that a reoccupation of Gaza by Israeli forces is not good. It's not good for Israel. It's not good for the Israeli people. Kirby added, one of the conversations that Secretary Blinken has been having in the region is what does post-conflict Gaza look like? What does governance look like in Gaza? Because whatever it is, it can't be what it was on the 6th of October. It cannot be Hamas. Not only that, U.S. State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel too has stated, our viewpoint is that Palestinians must be at the forefront of these decisions, and Gaza is Palestinian land and it will remain Palestinian land. Israel withdrew in 2005 from the Gaza Strip, which it had captured during the Six-Day War in 1967. This flurry of statements from the United States come after Netanyahu told ABC News in the US on Monday that Gaza should be governed by those who don't want to continue the way of Hamas. He said, and I quote, "I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, have the overall security responsibility because we've seen what happens when we don't have it." Now, this is the first major hint Netanyahu has given about his vision for a post-war Gaza. And it clearly suggests a divergent view from that of the United States, including US President Joe Biden's own statements about what the future of the Gaza Strip would look like. Biden, in an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes last month, had said it would be a big mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza. Other sharp differences also seem to have emerged between the US and Israel as the war rages on. President Biden has said he has told Prime Minister Netanyahu that there must be humanitarian pauses in the fighting in Gaza. The two leaders discussed this on the phone on Tuesday, and this has been confirmed by the White House. Earlier, during his visit to Tel Aviv, Secretary of State Antony Blinken pushed the Israelis for a humanitarian pause to allow hostages and civilians to leave Gaza and for aid for Palestinians to enter. But he was rebuked by Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister has categorically and repeatedly stated that no fuel will be delivered to Gaza and there will be no ceasefire in Israel's fighting with Hamas unless all the nearly 250 hostages are freed. It's been over a month since the Israel-Hamas war erupted following Hamas terror attacks on Israel on the 7th of October that left 1,400 Israelis, mostly civilians, dead. During Israel's relentless counteroffensive, over 10,500 Palestinians have been killed, and at least 4,300 of them were children, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Thousands of others have been injured, and over 1 million Gazans have been internally displaced during this period. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said Gaza is becoming a mass grave for children. The World Health Organization has said an average of 160 children are being killed every day in Gaza. UN Rights Chief Volker Turk has described the past month as one marked by carnage of incessant suffering, bloodshed, destruction, outrage and despair. Now, the global chorus for an immediate ceasefire is growing louder by the day, and international pressure on Israel is clearly mounting. As the humanitarian crisis in Gaza deepens, the United States is increasingly trying to balance its backing for Israel with calls for the protection of Palestinian civilians and for humanitarian pauses in the fighting. And here's another important aspect. According to a new poll, Americans are divided over Israel's response to Hamas attacks. The AP-NORC poll shows that while Americans have become more likely to describe Israel as an ally that US shares interests and values with since the war with Hamas began, they are divided over whether Israel has gone too far in its response to last month's attack. The survey conducted between the 2nd and the 6th of November also reveals skepticism amongst Democrats towards Israel, which could present a major challenge for President Joe Biden as he tries to balance his support for Israel's defense and his party's shifting priorities. Some have said that over 4,000 children dying in Gaza, that is the line that's too far. It's a sentiment more common amongst Democrats, 58% of whom view Israel's counterattack as excessive. Nearly 2/3 of Americans, that's 63%, disapprove of how Biden is handling the conflict between Israel and Hamas, while only 1/3 approve. Remember, Biden faces a tough presidential election in 2024, with Republican frontrunner and former President Donald Trump leading him in many polls at the moment.
When it comes to post-conflict governance in Gaza, a few things are clear and necessary. One, Gaza cannot be continue to be run by Hamas. That simply invites a repetition of October 7th, and Gaza used as a place from which to launch terrorist attacks. It's also clear that Israel cannot occupy Gaza. What I've heard from Israeli leaders is that they have no intent to reoccupy Gaza and retake control of Gaza. So the only question is there some transition period that might be necessary, and what might be the mechanisms that you could put in place for that to make sure that there is security. First, I should say this. We are planning for a constructive meeting between the leaders. We're still working on those plans. I think both sides have acknowledged the importance of leader-level channels in managing the relationship. And we both agree that we have an obligation, the United States and China, to responsibly manage the relationship. And that really, in many ways, starts and finishes with leader-level engagement.
You asked the Prime Minister of Israel for a 3-day pause.
I didn't get a chance to talk to him. I did ask him for a pause in the past, yesterday. Still waiting to hear some other things.
The G7 members agreed on the following points. 1. We condemn the terrorist attacks by Hamas and other groups. 2. We seek immediate release of hostages. 3. Emergency actions are needed to respond to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Thus, unhindered humanitarian assistance must be unable to secure food, water, healthcare, fuel, shelter, and access by humanitarian workers. We will support humanitarian pauses and humanitarian corridors to facilitate humanitarian assistance.
It's the 1-month anniversary of this incredible escalation of violence that we have seen. I'm, of course, from a human rights perspective, extremely worried about the situation, about what is happening, and it is really important that a solution is found to end the violence and to get out of this horrible, horrible humanitarian and human rights situation for what's happening in Gaza.
So So has this complex situation become even more complicated? Let's dissect this with our panel of experts. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Limor Bletter, Deputy Chief of Mission at the Consulate General of Israel in South India. She joins us live from Bengaluru. We're joined by Dr. Alexander Grinberg at the IDF Military Intelligence Research Department and Persian and Iran expert at the Jerusalem Institute for Security and Strategy. He joins us live from Israel, and joining us live from New York tonight is Irina Sukerman, National Security and Geopolitical Analyst. Thanks to all my guests for joining me on Global Lens tonight. Irina Sukerman, if I could start with you. 2 weeks ago, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant had categorically stated that Israel had no interest in controlling life in Gaza once this war was over. However, this Monday, Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to have taken a 180-degree turn and shifted the dynamics significantly by claiming that Israel is likely to have overall security responsibilities in the Gaza Strip for an indefinite period of time after the war is over. And no sooner had he made this statement than one American leader after another has come out and said, do not reoccupy Gaza. It is not good for the Palestinians. It is not good for Israel. It would be a big mistake. We've heard President Biden say it. We've heard Secretary of State Blinken say it. We've heard White House spokesperson say it. Would it be correct to say that even though over the last 1 month we've seen the US stand solidly in the corner of its close ally Israel during this war against Hamas, perhaps the first clear signs of a divergence of views are now emerging? What is your take?
I actually do not necessarily see a contradiction here, because occupation and the control of security are two separate issues. What Israel appears to be stating is that they will be responsible for ensuring their own border security and ensuring that no repetition occurs after the war. Just because Israel intends to put an end to Hamas military leadership in Gaza does not mean that all of Hamas will be cleared out immediately. Therefore, it is important for Israel to prevent any potential aftermath from remaining fighters, of whom there's probably many thousands besides that leadership. That does not, however, mean that Israel has any interest in annexing Gaza or in any way governing Gaza. I believe that Israel actually wants to have nothing to do with that after the past experiences and given the expenses and difficulties in that situation. That said, Israel is also concerned about lack of transition strategy on behalf of the international community. After nearly 2 decades of Hamas control over Gaza, there has been a general radicalization of the population, given the level of incitement in the media, even in the recruitment of children to military activity and general incitement against Israel and into Hamas ideology. Therefore, Israel is looking for some sort of an international solution, but it does also need to guarantee its own security. And so far, no one is proposing how to deal with the issue of radicalized fighters hidden among the populations after the main operations against Hamas infrastructure and leadership are over.
Well, you know, fact of the matter is that there is now growing pressure on Israel to call a ceasefire. This pressure is coming from countries in the Arab world. It's obviously come from the United Nations and all its agencies on multiple occasions. And there is growing evidence to suggest that a very large number of Americans too are increasingly uncomfortable with Israel's reaction to the Hamas terror attacks now that it's been 1 month of this war and thousands of Palestinians have been killed. But let me now go across to Dr. Alexander Grinberg. Dr. Grinberg, Irina Sukerman says there is no necessarily, a contradiction between what Prime Minister Netanyahu has said and what the Americans are saying. However, there are those who believe that there is a divergence of views which is now becoming apparent. You know, it's all very well to say that we are only talking about a security presence. We're not interested in governing Gaza, but fact is that Israel did withdraw from Gaza in 2005. Now, when Prime Minister Netanyahu says we're going to have an overall security responsibility for an indefinite period of time, even after the Hamas war is over, this has led many to ask, is Israel talking about a reoccupation? And just for the benefit of our viewers, I want to quickly read out some of the statements that have been made just in the last 48 hours by top American leaders who have said that there should be no forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, not now, not after the war. There can be or should be no reoccupation of Gaza once the conflict ends. There should be no attempt to blockade or besiege Gaza. There should be no reduction in the territory of Gaza. The US president still believes that a reoccupation of Gaza by Israeli forces is not good either for Israel or for the Israeli people. Our viewpoint is that Palestinians must be at the forefront of these decisions. Gaza is Palestinian land and it will remain Palestinian land. Therefore, my question to you is, what exactly is Prime Minister Netanyahu trying to say? And isn't Israel sending out mixed signals on this?
Yes, Israel may possibly sends mixed signals. But again, first, I think it's too early to count the chickens. We are still not there. There is much more to it than catch the eye. And the first goal of Israel, including Netanyahu, is the victory and putting down the Hamas. When this goal is achieved, only then any talk of Gaza's future will become possible. Iran is perfectly right, and I don't see any contradiction because it's not about annexing Gaza or something like that. We're talking about providing security because no comeback to normalcy in Israel will be possible as long as any danger keeps looming from Gaza. As to Mr. Blinken saying what is Israel's or Palestinians' interests, well, I would suggest that it is good for the Americans in general, for better foreign policy, to understand once for all. It's okay to say that this or another move by Israel or France or Russia or China or India or whatever contradicts American interests. But I prefer that we ourselves or anyone else define what our real interests are and what is good for us. It is not Blinken or Biden or anyone else who decides what is good for Israel, like it is the case with all other countries. And again, I don't see any other possible solution than preserving Israeli security control. As to the saying that the statement that the Palestinians must be at the front of their solutions, I don't understand why. They're aggressor, and this idea that the aggressor should never pay for his aggression, this rule applies to Palestinians alone. Because it is about Jews and Israel, because in all other cases, no one even evokes this issue of, so what about, for example, suggesting that Russia be at the forefront of the solutions regarding relations, Ukraine and Russia.
Okay, but Dr. Grinberg, with due respect, I need to come in here. You know, isn't it a deeply flawed argument to equate all Palestinians with Hamas? Because that is where the problem lies. That nobody in their right mind would condone or seek to even remotely justify the butchery and the barbarity that the Hamas terrorists displayed in carrying out those attacks on Israel on the 7th of October, but to equate all the 2.3 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip with Hamas, the 10,300 Palestinians who have been killed in the Israeli counteroffensive in the last 1 month, of whom at least 4,300 were children, sir. Are we calling them all Hamas? And are we saying that all of them must collectively be punished for what the Hamas terrorists did to Israel on the 7th of October? Isn't that a deeply problematic argument?
No, not at all. It's a completely just and the rightest argument, because we are not talking about a judicial debate whether we define anyone as supporting Hamas or not. First, it is upon the Palestinians to prove and to show to the fighting army that they are civilians. For example, yesterday some Palestinians rose a white flag and they were let out without any problem. It's not my job to distinguish civilians from the fighters. It's upon the civilians to show they are not part of them. Ditto is about the other Palestinians. If there are Palestinians who resist Hamas, oppose Hamas, okay, let's come out from Gaza or support Hamas. Again, it's not a judicial debate. Our goal is to nivell and remove completely is Hamas, and we do it by all. This question has never been evoked in any other conflict. The Brits never bothered themselves with the question with whether all the Germans and German children in Berlin and Dresden were solidary with the Nazis or not. There was the most important goal to put down the Nazi regime and put end to the sufferings of the Holocaust. That was the goal. To do that, there was only one way to put down this regime. That's all. We have no target to strike intentionally civilians, of course. But if Hamas puts and settles its central command intentionally under the Shifa hospital, that, by the way, was constructed by Israeli architects. So they use intentionally it against Israel because they know in advance that Israel will be the only country that will be condemned for striking civilians. It would never work with the Russians or with any other country because they don't care in advance. And they're never punished or called into question for those actions.
Well, last time I checked, President Putin and Russia have been condemned by most countries around the world for their aggression against Ukraine. But let me now go across to Lemar Bletter at this point. Lemar Bletter, is it incumbent on the 2.3 million Palestinians living in Gaza Strip to prove to Israeli soldiers that they are not Hamas? I'm not sure how the over 4,000 children who've been killed in the Israeli counteroffensive in the last 1 month were supposed to prove that they were not Hamas. The question really is that even as Israel, if we could just have Lemar Bletter up on the screen, please. Even as Israel says, all we are doing is to exercise self-defense, today it is being asked some very tough questions. Is annihilating an entire people, going after 2.3 million people, is that self-defense? Many have termed what's happening in Gaza a genocide of Palestinians, and they're asking, is that self-defense? Killing of children and babies, is that really Israel's definition of self-defense? It's not half as simple as Dr. Grinberg makes it out to be.
So, first of all, I would like to say that obviously just the fact of the use of some of the terms you just said, it's very clear that Israel is not, I mean, just the fact that you're using such terms, we're not targeting civilians. We're not
These
targeting
are not my
children.
terms, ma'am. Just to clarify, this is what
No, I know.
large parts
I
of the
apologize.
international community are saying, including the United Nations. Go ahead.
Yes. So, if of course, if that was misunderstood, but just what we're seeing today, again, this has been said by people, obviously, that are against Israel. We're talking about a situation where Israel is attacking after the horrendous, murderous attack, terror attack of Hamas of the 7th of October. Israel has been targeting the Hamas infrastructure for a long period of time before it began its ground operation. So the fact that the people use this kind of terms and saying that we are going against the 2 million people, Israel is doing whatever it can to protect the civilians in Gaza, and being the one that is doing that and that is issuing messages for the people of Gaza to go to the north of the strip in order to be, and telling them in advance to go there in order to be safe, and the fact that we are allowing for these humanitarian corridors for people to go to the safe places, and we are allowing for trucks to get in. So obviously there is no such issue of us going against civilians in Gaza. Our sole goal is to destroy Hamas infrastructure, Hamas military places where they shoot rockets at Israel. And what happens during that process is that we know that Hamas is hiding under civilian facilities. They're hiding under UN buildings. They're hiding under schools, mosques. Now we've seen some of the pictures that were seen here in this show, and you yourself showed some of the rocket launchers that you see next to playground. We found such launcher within youth movement of children. So what happens here again, and we need to all the time while we go on and continue to speak about this war against Hamas, is that we are now in a position where we are not interested to hurt civilians. We are not interested in hurting any innocent people in Gaza, and that's why we are doing whatever we can. And of course, as the pictures show now, we are doing whatever we can to allow these people to go and be safe. But obviously, when we are fighting against an enemy that is hiding behind people and using them as human shields, we are sometimes there are things that are bound to happen that unfortunately we will not be able to prevent, because these are also part of the casualties of war, unfortunately. And we have to remember that we have still 2,039 people, babies, children, men and women, and elderly that are being held hostage by Hamas. It's now been 1 month and 1 day since these people have been kidnapped into Gaza. They are not, while some people in the international community are talking about obviously the unfortunate casualties in Gaza, we are talking about babies that are being held hostages, children that their parents were murdered on the terrorist attack of October 7th. And these people, till now, have not been allowed to, there was no, Hamas did not allow, nobody, the Red Cross was not given permission to see them. We are not, so right now when we're talking about humanitarian situation, we need to also talk about the humanitarian situation of the hostages that are still in Gaza and were not released and are not given any access, and the Red Cross has not visited them or gave information about these people. So this is a very, very, very important point that needs to be made. Again, Israel is not targeting all the people of Gaza. Israel is not targeting the civilians of Gaza. The opposite. Israel is interested that these people will be safe. For their safety, there are many measures that are being done. Part of these measures is also the humanitarian aid that is being brought into Gaza, into South Gaza. Also, the fact that we know, as the Israeli army knows, when there's some place is a shelter or something like that, they know they're not going to attack it. Obviously, sometimes if there is
Okay.
something,
But
if
you
you
know,
have people
okay,
hiding
go ahead.
behind a, okay, if you have people hiding behind a hospital or something like that, that would
Okay.
be changing the situation.
Okay, you know, this is not me saying it, but the United Nations
No,
has
of course.
said that hospitals, schools, refugee camps, shelters have all been targeted. And while I have to say this once again on record, like I said on every show that I've done in the last 1 month, that what the Hamas terrorists did on the 7th of October was absolutely barbaric. There can be no remote justification for that butchery. And, you know, yes, you're absolutely right. Innocent women, children, and elderly were killed or kidnapped by these terrorists. But at the same time, I am not sure how Israelis expect the international community to look away from the fact that there are also babies and children dying in Gaza. And you know what I do find problematic, and this is something I have faced as a news anchor repeatedly on my shows, that the moment you express sympathy for those innocent children of Gaza who've had to lose their lives, you are labeled as being pro Hamas or anti Israel. You know, this is like George W. Bush saying after 9/11, you're either with us or against us. Can we be talking in such reductionist binaries? Why is it not possible for my heart to bleed for the Israeli victims of Hamas terror and equally for the women and children of Gaza who are dying? But on that note, let me go back to Irina Sukerman at this point. Irina, since you are in the United States, I want to come back to the Israel-US equation. You know, you believe that there is no contradiction between the stands taken by the two countries. However, I also want to point out to you and our viewers that it's not just on the issue of, reoccupation of Gaza that the statements seem to sound somewhat divergent. We've also had a clear disagreement on the issue of a ceasefire. You know, Prime Minister Netanyahu has completely ruled out a general ceasefire. He says till all the hostages are released, while you have the US repeatedly saying we need quote unquote humanitarian pauses in this fighting. Antony Blinken is on record as having said it. He said it while he was in Tel Aviv, and many thought that Prime Minister Netanyahu rebuffed him. He said it again in Japan today at the end of the G7 foreign ministers meeting. President Biden has said once again that he has told Prime Minister Netanyahu that we need humanitarian pauses. The White House spokespersons have said it. Therefore, I'm going to ask you once again, is there not a divergence of views between the two close allies on many critical issues now? And as I pointed out to you at the start of the show, there are now polls in the US that suggest that Americans are deeply divided, and there are many, especially Democrats, who believe that Israel has gone too far in its response to Hamas attacks. And this is something that could become increasingly problematic for President Biden in the run-up to the 2024 presidential elections. How do you view that as somebody who is in the United States today?
I view that as President Biden feeling the need to express the interests of various other parties, including his own constituency, to show that he is pressing for these interests, but he is also respectful of Israel's choices in the matter. And Israel has repeatedly explained why a humanitarian pause or a ceasefire at this time would be completely inappropriate. It would only give Hamas time to rearm, regroup, and resituate itself. Hamas has not expressed any intention to release the hostages until their own needs are met, which contradicts the whole point of the behind-the-scenes negotiations. They have already committed horrific war crimes, and now they're making demands. That is not up to Hamas to make demands. Regarding the humanitarian situation, it is very important to note that throughout this entire process, humanitarian aid has been entering Gaza. There have been hundreds of trucks, there have been airlifts, there have been humanitarian corridors for the civilians to relocate and for foreign nationals to leave Gaza to Rafah. There have been all sorts of measures taken jointly by Israel, the United States, Egypt, and other countries to provide the sort of urgent humanitarian access to facilitate the plight of civilians. Therefore, this talk about humanitarian pause has nothing to do with the delivery of humanitarian aid. It will only aid Hamas. Everyone else who has needs has other ways throughout this continuing process to be able to either leave or to receive assistance.
Okay, you know, fact of the matter is that you talk to not just Palestinians, you talk to any aid agency, including the United Nations and the Red Cross, they will tell you that the aid that has reached Gaza in recent days has been a mere trickle, less than a drop in the ocean compared to what they need. And of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu is on record as saying no fuel will be delivered to Gaza, and you have a situation where hospitals are not able to function anymore. They're not able to, treat the critically injured, and people are losing their lives because most of the hospitals now seem to be out of service. And I want to go back to Dr. Alexander Grinberg, and before I put my question to him, I want to quickly mention, again, these are not my words, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said Gaza is becoming a mass grave for children. And therefore, I will say one more time, I'm not sure how those children who've been killed were supposed to prove that they were not Hamas. But Dr. Grinberg, my question is this. I know you said earlier that Israel will act in its own self-interest. It's not going to be dictated to by the US or anyone else, but fact of the matter is that the United States is your strongest and most important ally. They have gone out of their way to express support for you. They have sent aircraft carriers to the Mediterranean to act as a deterrence against Iran and other adversaries in the region. But at the same time, does it really not matter that President Biden is saying repeatedly that we need humanitarian pauses in the fighting, that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is saying repeatedly we need aid to get in, and if that means there should be a humanitarian pause, so be it. The fact that there is growing chorus around the world with country after country saying that, you know, what's happening right now in Gaza is an annihilation of the Palestinian people. So I'm going to ask you again, as you count on your most important ally for very critical support in this ongoing war, where Iran also is a very crucial factor, how is it not significant what the Americans feel about how Israel is continuing with its war effort?
Well, I don't know what the Americans feel. I think it's too generalizing to talk about what the Americans feel. I'm sure that it was the US Army doing that. There will be even way more killed Palestinians than with the IDF. Yes, it's our significant ally, the most important one, and we of course appreciate the sincere support of in tears of President Biden. But still, America is a superpower. It's a foreign country that always has its own interests that not always in line with our ones. And once it is about the lives of our children, we don't give a damn to the opinion of anyone else. Only in this case, I emphasize. Okay, so as to the American support, it's great, it is important, but it has also interests, because without this American support, we may do even more decisive and unexpectable things. It's not only for like philanthropy or support for Israel. And again, the only thing we want is the stop control of Hamas and to set free all our hostages, including babies and women. If Hamas wants to stop the death of with citizens, civilians, whatever, it doesn't, citizens has only subjects and slaves, like all other dictatorships. The only thing they have to do is to set free the people they have abducted from the sovereign territory of Israel. They do this, everything will stop, at least for several days. Okay? Antonio Guterres is just a primitive anti-Semitic communist, and they don't really hold much esteem for either for Antonio Guterres or for his organization, whose head was in the 70s a Nazi, Kurt Waldheim, who created Zionist terrorists. They really don't give a damn to the opinion of the UN or anyone else when it is about the safety and life of my children. Point.
Okay, I must say those are very, very strong, even harsh words for the United Nations and its Secretary General. I wonder if you're sort of painting them all with the same brush and calling them anti-Semitic, and that is where a large part of this Israeli narrative is problematic. The moment you talk about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, you become anti-Semitic, you become anti-Jew, you become an enemy of Israel. I am not sure how, one can necessarily draw that conclusion. And, when you say we don't give a damn about what the Americans or anyone else says, I would like to remind you that you could very well end up facing a multi-front war. It's not just Hamas that you're fighting against. There is Hezbollah in Lebanon. There is, there are the Houthis in Yemen. There is Syria, and there is Iran, which many believe is the mastermind of it all. And that is the primary reason why the United States of America decided to deploy its aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. So it's not as if you do not need an ally like the United States. However, you still maintain we don't give a damn. But with all due respect, I would still say just because somebody says that it is not all right for innocent Palestinians and children to be massacred, that does not make them anti-Semitic, that does not make them an enemy of the Jews or of Israel. With all due respect, sir. Let me now...
It does. Doesn't when you're Indian and you're not Christian. It's okay. But when it is about Christian cultures and singling out Jews is anti-Semitism. Once anyone evokes rules that apply to Jews alone, it is anti-Semitism. The mere word of innocent is evoked uniquely in the context of Israel. Please find me another example when this word is mentioned. That's the point. The term that is used is exclusively non-combatants or non-involved. To call them sadistic mob rejoicing over the murder of Israeli children and women and other innocent or non-involved, it's insulting the memory of the victims.
All right, you're entitled to your view, Dr. Greenberg, but I would have to, respectfully disagree with you when you say anybody who's critical of Israel's actions in Gaza is anti-Jew or anti-Semitic. Okay, you have your views on the UN and the UN chief, but let me now take closing remarks from Limor Bletter. Limor Bletter, whether it is the United States, whether it is countries like France that have called for an immediate ceasefire, whether it is the larger Arab world, whether it is aid agencies, whether it is the United Nations, fact of the matter is, 1 month into this war, there is now a growing chorus around the world asking for a ceasefire, asking for a cessation of hostilities, not because the world is an enemy of Israel, not because the entire world is anti-Semitic and they hate Jews, but because people are dying every day in Gaza, including thousands and thousands of children. My question to you is simply this. Do you not believe that in the days ahead, Israel could find itself increasingly isolated because the global narrative has shifted and the sympathies of the world are shifting very rapidly now towards the Palestinians? Israel had the sympathy and the support of the world in the aftermath of the 7th October massacre. But given what's happening in Gaza for the last 1 month, that is changing.
So I think, first of all, that we still have support. And talking about, again, the U.S., there's a deep alliance between Israel and the U.S. for many, many years, and it will continue. And we saw for this war that they have been, we saw, it proved itself that they are our allies. And what needs to be understood here is that we don't have any other option right now. There is, if we are talking about a ceasefire, like what purpose is it going to what is it going to do? Like to allow Hamas to recuperate, or to allow them? The hostages are not back. We are not. How are we going to be sure that the safety of the country, of the citizens of Israel and the people of Israel is going to be returned, and that we're not going to have a threat from the Gaza Strip? So any talks about about a ceasefire for us is just simply something that we don't see right now. We don't see how we have right now any other choice than do whatever we need to do in order to destroy Hamas and to bring back the hostages. As you said, the lives of people, the loss of lives of people anywhere is always unfortunate. But right now, what we need to take in consideration is how we make sure that what happened on 7th of October does not happen again. How we make sure that people are safe from the missiles of Hamas. How we make sure that, what about the hostages, the babies, the children? What would another country do when they're faced with this kind of situation? So right now, we need to do what we can in order to make Israel safe again, and to bring the hostages, of course.
Of course, the safe release of hostages is a top priority. There's no doubt about that. But you know, when this argument is made that this is being done to make Israel and Israelis safe again, and we're going to finish off Hamas, there are many who have expressed skepticism and wondered whether that is even a realistic target that Israel is going after. Can Hamas really be finished? What is the outcome of this war likely to be? Prime Minister Netanyahu says we're going to have a complete victory. That's the only way this war is going to end. Can there be any such thing as a complete victory, especially in a war such as this? I think those are questions that will continue to be asked. And yes, as the days pass by and more Palestinians die, I guess it is safe to say that Israel will find itself increasingly under international pressure. Let's see which way this war is headed. The world certainly wants to see an end to it. On that note, Limor Bletter, Dr. Alexander Grinberg, Irina Sukerman, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight and sharing your time and perspective with us.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. Good night.